Welcome to Produce Talks.
This whole business is based on relationship and friendships.
Food is darn simple.
What can we do? What are other countries doing?
How important it is for industry to be talking about this.
We're going back to the farm. We're going back to the whole food.
Hello and welcome to Produce Talks, the CPMA podcast. Moving product globally day in and day out is an incredible feat. That is something we've especially learned following the pandemic and now the Suez Canal crisis. There are implications when one link in the global supply chain breaks, and this episode, we're talking about that movement of produce across borders, through ports, and around the globe. For produce importers and exporters to and from Canada, there are many factors at play in terms of port labor disputes, border delays, and COVID implications. And we'll aim to cover all of that on this episode. Joining me will be Steve DeVries, Director of Commercial Compliance at the Canadian Border Services Agency, and Shannon Summerhour, Director of Government Relations at CPMA. And first, I'd like to welcome Stephen DeVries to the show, Director of Commercial Compliance in the Commercial Trade Branch at the Canadian Border Services Agency. Welcome, Stephen.
Good morning. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you so much for joining the conversation today. Maybe you can kick it off and tell us a little bit about yourself and your branch's role at CBSA.
Sure. Well, first of all, you can call me Steve. My mom calls me Stephen. And I've been with CBSA for about 20 years, starting as an officer in Toronto back in 2000. And I am Director of Commercial Compliance. And what my area really looks at is, well, first of all, compliance across the commercial space. So whether that's data compliance or reporting compliance, but also we look at technology, detection technology, and our secondary examination processes. So, and that really flows through whether it's marine, air, highway, rail. What are the procedures and policies we have in place for examination of goods?
I mean, there's going to be a lot of ground that we want to cover with you. There's a lot of topics, I would say, and areas of impact, whether it's, port labor disputes, border delays, COVID implications. So the past year has been filled with challenges for the fresh produce industry. That goes without saying. And I'm sure CBSA has been no different. How has the operational reality at the Canadian border evolved and been impacted over the past year?
Yeah, I think that's, it's a really good question. And I think, so many of us have been impacted in so many different ways and really changing how we approach our business across the board and certainly with your members as well. Fundamentally, we've had to, reassess how we manage the border and how we keep our officers safe, but also ensuring that those protocols keep Canadians safe as well. And I think thirdly, to say that we need to keep, whether it's cargo or the people that are essential to move, we keep them moving. As you can imagine, we've seen a large drop in passenger traffic, but commercial goods have continued to move. We've really been focused on ensuring that smooth movement of goods, and especially those high priority items. Early in the pandemic, we talked a lot about PPE and ensuring that also our supply chains were moving so that, Canadians could have and, be supplied with food and have the goods that they needed. And how we've done this, some small things that we've done, but also large changes of moving our offices around to higher priority areas. For instance, we've seen a high growth in courier and postal volumes, so we've had to adjust to that. We've also introduced some no-touch processes that allow us to complete our processes faster and easier. For instance, the e-long room was an initiative to allow the secure submission of documents via email. So what used to be paper can now be done through email and be stamped through email in many offices across the country. It's a simple idea, but something that we're rapidly able to roll out across the country.
Mm-hmm. Accelerated change has certainly been a theme over the last year, in terms of how COVID has accelerated things that, maybe we would have seen 2-3 years down the road that we saw over the last year. So just on the topic of I guess, pandemic shopping, we've heard about the increased congestion at ports in the United States, and you somewhat alluded to this. Is that something that CBSA has noted similar in terms of challenges at Canadian ports?
I'm not sure I can fully, compare it apples to apples per se. I mentioned we've seen large increases in postal and courier and some cargo shipments, and having to adapt to that. And I think we all know, and many of us have experienced this. The online shopping has increased. Therefore, e-commerce and those types of shipments have gone up during this period. So, as an agency, we respond to that and adjust our operations. I think from a port perspective in marine ports, there's certainly been some congestion, and how that filters down to the whole supply chain. So it's whether it's having a berth to unload a ship, or the capacity to move goods off the docks and into the supply chain. I think we've seen a bit of that. I will say also the ports that we cover as CBSA are not as numerous as in the States. So the opportunities for pandemic shopping are a bit perhaps more limited directly.
Gotcha. That's a great segue to my next question. We know that the Port of Vancouver is the busiest in the country. The Tsawwassen Container Examination Facility and the implementation of large-scale imaging is a project many are excited about, particularly in the West. For our listeners that don't know about it, can you tell us a little bit more about that project and maybe provide a bit of an update in terms of its status?
I mean, overall, the project was started a number of years ago to really expand examination capacity on the West Coast. As you noted, Vancouver is the busiest marine port in Canada, and we see large volumes of goods moving through there. So the first step was the construction of the Tsawwassen Container Exam Facility. And that opened in June 2019, dramatically increasing the CBSA's examination space on the West Coast. So that has been a bit of a game changer. And if you know the geography a bit, we now have two facilities in Vancouver. And so that has lowered the need for transport of containers to the previously one exam facility.
Gotcha.
The next step is, and we're working hard towards, is the construction of a fixed LSI. So LSI, large scale imaging, essentially a very large X-ray, which can scan a whole container at one time. And, this will really be a good modernization of our process in Vancouver, allowing us to quickly see, and I say see in quotes, what's inside of a container and perhaps release it directly from that. The goal being that we can examine quicker, and once we are done, that container can be released and back into the supply chain.
Are there additional large-scale imaging products or similar advancements planned for other facilities?
We're always looking at opportunities for that. We do have one at a land border in the West as well, but we're always exploring opportunities to expand this further. And we do think it's a good tool. First of all, we are interested in finding contraband and keeping Canadians safe. But also, we think and believe it's a good tool for increasing efficiency, and that's important to our trade chain as well. In terms of the status of the construction of the fixed LSI, we don't have firm dates at this point. But what I can say is we're working closely with the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority to move that forward and to initiate construction in the near future. And we will certainly be sharing information with the broader trade community once we have more definitive dates on that.
Well, that's great. No, it sounds like a very exciting and important project. So.
Yeah, it will be great. I'm looking forward to it.
On the topic of ports, of course, CPMA and many of our members have been actively watching the ongoing labor dispute at the Port of Montreal. We're recording this on March 31st, and those negotiations are ongoing. Last summer's strike at the port had significant impacts on CPMA members, not just in the East, but across Canada. And in addition to delivery delays and sales lost to product perishability, members also reported, greenhouse building materials and infrastructure delayed into the fall, raising concerns about production capacity for the year. What has CBSA been doing to put a contingency plan in place for future labor or other disruptions? And how will it ensure that essential and perishable products continue to reach Canadians?
I mean, it's a good question, and following the labor action in the last summer, we took a look at how that occurred and what we could learn from that event. We talked to all of our regional operations and with a broad cross section of the stakeholder community as well to get their perspectives. And what we've done is taken all that input and tried to distill it down to, what measures can we put in place to respond for a future strike. And, perhaps beyond a strike, this is really about any disruptive event that could happen and what do we do in that situation. So we've taken the opportunity to update our Marine Port Contingency Plan and to really lay out those pieces on how we can bring our operations back to stability in any event. I think it's also important to note, we manage this within the mandate of CBSA, and the percentage of marine containers that we see is actually quite low. So we are putting in and working with stakeholders to ensure that we can continue to keep those moving in the event of a strike. But there will be bigger impacts on the supply chain as a whole that aren't subject to CBSA examination. We need to continue to deliver on our safety and security mandate, and so if there is a strike, those ships need to be offloaded at ports that have the facilities that allow us to do that work, and that includes the right equipment and examination space, and also radiation portals so that we can scan those containers coming off.
So switching gears and perhaps maybe to one of the more hot button topics, I would say, for some of our members. One of the biggest challenges CPMA hears from its members when it comes to the border is delays in getting product through the ports. Of course, for our perishable products, delays can mean not only increases in shipping costs, but also spoilage and lost sales. We know that CBSA has been working to identify ways to address concerns about delays at Canada's ports. What have you found so far, and what are the anticipated efforts to address these problems?
Well, I think, first of all, I want to say that we manage the border as a balance between health and safety and ensuring that goods are facilitated and low-risk goods are facilitated quickly. And it's something that we take very seriously. And that, the majority of commercial shipments come in and are authorized to enter without delay. We talk about a small percentage that are subject to examination, and we're always looking at how can we make that process more efficient. And we do that through a number of means. Strictly within the CBSA context, we use a lot of different tools, detection tools that can speed up an examination, so that perhaps we don't have to de-stuff a container completely in order to mitigate the risk. If we can do it through large-scale imaging, as I discussed earlier, that's an effective way to proceed. And I think it's also really looking at the process and all the handoffs in a particular import, so that we can find the most efficient way to do that. For instance, we have looked at our policies and determined, where things could be adjusted in order to provide a more efficient process. But we must also work with all of our partners in the industry to ensure those handoffs are working well as well. So we've all got a part to play in this. I think, one big message I'd like to give perhaps to your members is ensuring that the quality of the data that is submitted to the CBSA is strong from the start. That allows us to risk assess any good coming into Canada. And that helps ensure that it will experience less delays on entry.
Yeah. And actually, that's another great segue. So, talking about data. Blockchain technology is a hot topic for business processes, for business process streamlining, and to provide a secure means of sharing data across the supply chain, including, of course, with the fresh produce supply chain. So what opportunities does CBSA see to leverage blockchain in the future to streamline those processes at the border?
Well, we have participated in 2 pilots with industry in limited circumstances that are related to blockchain. And, we've been looking at the viability of this and, whether it meets our needs. I think it really presents an exciting opportunity to have that information consolidated in one place and all the players in the process providing that. I think from our perspective, it's important that all the stakeholders get what they need from it, and ensure that we have the infrastructure in place to provide that data. I think we definitely see promise here. It's going to involve close collaboration across all the stakeholders in the industry, and ensuring that each piece in that chain provides their data, but also sees benefit in the consolidation of that information. And in order for it to really be valuable, we need, a broad spectrum of people playing in this space in order to provide that, so that it is robust and it gives all the individuals or all of the stakeholders what they need from it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting because anytime there's a conversation around blockchain, that's certainly one of the common themes. Is collaboration, is engaging all the stakeholders, and it's an exciting technology, and certainly one that we'll continue to engage with.
It is something that we will continue to look at and explore the viability. And if there are opportunities for pilots, that's something that we would look at with interest.
So looking forward, before we wrap up, can you tell us a little bit about the changes in CBSA projects that the fresh produce industry should be aware of? We know that CARM implementation has been delayed, but is still on the horizon. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the CARM rollout and how our members can be prepared for that.
Sure, happy to. So CARM is it's the CBSA Assessment and Revenue Management System or project, and there has been some adjustment to the schedule and taking into the consideration the concerns expressed by stakeholders and impacts of the pandemic. So we will see release 1 of CARM in May 2021 and release 2 a year later at May 2022. So what is the difference between release 1 and release 2? I think what's important to note here is release 1 is really the introduction of the CARM client portal, which offers the basic functionality for all stakeholders, customs brokers, importers, consultants, to onboard into the portal. They can create their business accounts, ensure that their employees have access, and link those employees to the business account. The key step here is establishing the business relationship and delegating authority within the portal. So the right people have the right authority to act on the business's behalf. And this is very important to get into place before release 2, so that everyone is ready to go when that comes into place. Mm-hmm. And then moving to release 2 is, this is really the foundation of CARM and a lot of the change. I think one of the important things to note here is importers who wish to take advantage of release prior to payment will be required to provide financial security, whether through a surety bond or a cash deposit, to ensure that the duties and taxes are paid for their imports. So that critical step will need to be in place by that release 2. Release 2 will really roll out the core of the CARM functionality across the commercial spectrum, and it includes the ability to perform electronic corrections and adjustments. So replacing today's process of B3s and B2s. So that'll be a great step forward.
That's great. No, it sounds like another important project. And to our listeners, we are planning a webinar with CBSA in June on the CARM rollout and how you can get prepared. So, Steve, I want to say thank you so much. We covered a lot of ground and topics in 20 minutes here, and I'm sure our listeners really appreciate the insights and all the information that you provided. So thank you so much for joining.
Well, you're very welcome, and certainly value the contributions of all our stakeholders, and look forward to working with you in the future.
That's great. Thanks again. Let's take a quick break with a word from our sponsor, Nature Fresh Farms. After the break, we'll hear from CPMA Director of Government Relations, Shannon Summerhour.
Hi everyone, it's Sarah here from Nature Fresh Farms. Having facilities and greenhouses spread throughout the United States, Canada, and Mexico, we are confident in our surety of supply, delivering consumers nutritional product throughout the year. And with many more growth projects for the coming year, Nature Fresh Farms look forward to our international growth and continued expansion into new markets. For more information on our market reach, visit www.naturefresh.ca.
Next on the show is Director of Government Relations and my good colleague and friend at CPMA, Shannon Summerhour. Welcome, Shannon.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And it's really nice to be here with you in this divider-filled space that we've got going.
Yeah, our listeners can't see, but we're in the same room. We're in our boardroom, but we have two dividers dividing us right now. So we are maintaining social distancing protocols. So thanks so much for joining the conversation today. You are CPMA's lead on customs issues, leading CPMA's customs working group, and serving as a CPMA rep on the CBSA's Border Commercial Consultative Committees. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your work on customs issues at CPMA?
Thank you. As you said, I am the Director of Government Relations at CPMA. So that encompasses a whole bunch of different files and advocacy work. But today we're talking about the customs file. And we do sort of a variety of things. So on a more micro level, if there are delays or other issues at the border, I work individually with members to help resolve those. But I do also on the government relations side of things represent CPMA on the CBSA's Border Commercial Consultative Committees, which is a large industry stakeholder group that CBSA brings together a few times a year to really dig into the different projects that CBSA has going on and different issues facing industry and trade chains more broadly. And then just in the last year, we've started our customs working group that operates under our government issue management committee, but we're doing more of a deep dive into customs issues and how they relate to CPMA members and how CPMA can help our members in navigating some of the challenges they're facing. So that's a really new but exciting group.
Yeah, and after talking with Steve, I mean, certainly got the impression that there's a lot of things happening right now on the customs files generally. So it's all very exciting and all very great work that CPMA is involved in. So when you're speaking with industry, and in particular our members, shipping product across borders and through ports and so on, what are the biggest challenges that you hear when it comes to the border?
So by far the biggest one that we hear is a delay of some kind. So oftentimes that's because a product has been flagged for inspection. Recently, we had some delays because of SFC licensing issues that I was helping members with. Mm-hmm. But delays are the biggest one because, unlike a shipment of TVs, say, if the product is delayed, those TVs will still be the same TVs they were when they got into the shipping container. Even if they get to the buyer a bit late, the buyer's not going to be happy, but they're still going to have TVs. Whereas with fresh produce, that's certainly not the case. Obviously, we have a highly perishable product that breaks down. So it's not just losing the product itself, but potentially losing sales as well. So those are the big things that really are big impacts for people. And the other thing that comes with delays too is additional costs for demurrage and time sitting and paying your shipping line waiting for you. So those are the biggest things for sure. With CBSA, we have found there is a patchwork of jurisdictions, so to speak. So, I mean, Steve probably spoke to this somewhat. CBSA always points to their limited role when it comes to the ports, in particular, the port authorities operating as independent entities. And so the port will say, oh, well, this is our service standard and we're meeting this service standard, and CBSA has their service standard that they're trying to meet. And it's sometimes the gaps in between those pieces that can cause challenges for people. So a major focus of our work on the government relations side is to really encourage the government to take a more holistic view of the border, both from a regulatory perspective, but also from an operational perspective, to make sure that our perishable and essential products can still reach people.
And we'll talk a little bit more about the Port of Montreal situation in a little bit. But first, I want to talk about disruption. As we all know, the past year has been filled with disruptions for the fresh produce supply chain, from COVID-19 to, up until last week with the Suez Canal shipping crisis. If any of that has taught us anything, it's that, moving product globally day in and day out is an incredible feat. And, there are implications when one link in that global supply chain breaks. So what have been some of the impacts when looking at COVID, when looking at, even the Suez Canal crisis? Like what have been some of the impacts from some of the disruptions that we've seen?
Yeah, as you said, it's amazing I think we all take for granted that the machine keeps working and keeps churning things along, and that product just arrives to us magically. And the Suez Canal issue particularly really, I think, brought home for people that it's not nearly as simple as they think it is, and that even just a fairly short delay, all things considered, is really not a fairly short delay when it comes to this type of global trade. So, I mean, one of the things that we've seen in relation to COVID, and I think also coming out of the Suez Canal crisis and COVID as well, is that shipping containers are really at a premium. There is a shortage, and just a few weeks ago, there was stories about the congestion at the ports of Los Angeles and Oakland, where there were a lot of containers backed up, in part due to COVID pandemic shopping and all the online shopping that Americans are doing while they're hanging out at home, but also because companies are finding it's cheaper to ship a container that's empty back to China empty than it is to actually take up product in the States and move it somewhere else and whatever. So that, I mean, as you said, the one cog somehow becomes, this massive problem. But the other thing that has been interesting, I will say, in relation to the border and COVID, is that at least at the outset, one of the things we heard from folks was that it was the smoothest they'd ever seen the border move, in part because the government, particularly in the Canada-US border, both governments were really invested in making sure that trade continued and all those supply chains were able to keep humming. And of course, there was much less traffic because people weren't traveling for fun. And so, I mean, that's probably going to shift in the not too distant future if it hasn't already started to shift. But that was something that people were pleased to see, even in the midst of this disruption of COVID. And the other thing is that CBSA was able to make some progress on things like moving to paperless systems that had been kind of in the works for a while, but really COVID and the necessities of not spreading COVID provided a different catalyst for moving some of those things forward. So there's definitely costs and challenges, but there are opportunities occasionally too.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting you mentioned that, because I recall a conference call that was pretty much exactly this time last year. That was several government departments on a call for our members. We had CFIA, we had CBSA, and a couple others. And one of the comments that came through the chat box was, this is the best performance in terms of the collaboration between different departments at the federal level that they've ever seen, which, I mean, it's just interesting to hear that. And it's interesting to, reflect on that, I think.
Yeah, it's certainly something we're going to try to build on in many ways in our advocacy files. I could get into that. But, I think that broader government cooperation and not operating in silos is a key theme for us in general, but certainly here too.
Yeah. So moving on back to the Port of Montreal situation a little bit. We know that many of our members have been actively watching the ongoing labor disputes at the Port of Montreal, with significant concern that a strike, would result in major delays and additional costs. What are you hearing about the situation, and how are you preparing?
So what we're hearing is, as you said, a great deal of concern from our members. I mean, it's a challenge. The uncertainty itself is a challenge for people, because it's difficult to make a plan when you don't know what's going to be the case a week or two from now. And so I know we have talked to a number of companies that are doing a cost benefit analysis of what is the known cost of rerouting my product to a different port, or even through the United States, where, there are some additional compliance pieces that then go along with that. But those are known costs versus the unknown potential cost of a strike. And it's sort of the devil you know or the devil you don't in some ways. And so that's definitely something we're hearing. The strike last August, we know, had major impacts for our members. There was more than 200 containers we know that were impacted, millions of dollars of lost product, and massive increases in container traffic at Port of St. John and Port of Halifax, which had, significant impacts there too, in terms of capacity to move things forward. And even by the Port of Montreal's own assessment, normal operations didn't resume until November, even though the strike itself was in August. And we heard from members who had not fresh product, they're still in the fall, but, greenhouse construction materials, which, aren't perishable products, but they do have an impact on our ability to produce these perishable products for the next growing season. So, and even a 2-week strike had months of impact. So we're definitely watching that keenly. CPMA is involved in a group with the Chamber of Commerce with a number of organizations, and we've put out some joint letters and joint statements. And we also sent a letter to all MPs and senators outlining the specific impacts to produce, because of course, again, with the TVs, not great for the TVs, definitely worse for bananas, or berries or whatever. So that's something we're really highlighting. And our key message is, whether it's a labor disruption or another disruption to our earlier discussion, the government needs to find a way for product to move through the ports for essential and perishable products, so medicine, food, to move through the port, even in the case of a disruption. So there needs to be a mechanism in place to allow that to happen. And in the interim, while we're waiting to see how the negotiations pan out or don't, that's really our focus, is to try and get the government in a position where they'll put that mechanism in place. So a shout out to everybody who wants to write to their local MPs, please do that. I can send you a template letter. Happy to support you in that. But that's really our focus. And in terms of other things that members can do to prepare, I would say, if you haven't already, I'm sure you have, make your contingency plan, talk to your shipping line about what their contingency plan is. And if you are rerouting product, CBSA has let us know that they really want to know that information as soon as possible, so that they can work as quickly as they can on their end to basically meet the demand wherever that product is showing up. And you can let them know through me. So you can find my email address. I won't spell it because my name is really long, but you can find it on the CPMA website, and I am happy to help get that info to CBSA.
Yeah, that's great, and great information about the ongoing situation. And it's a great lead into the next question. As we mentioned at the top of the segment, and as you just mentioned, around industry engagement with CBSA. I mean, on all of our advocacy files, of course, but from that industry engagement side, can you talk a little bit about the importance of this engagement and what you've learned through these experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the interesting thing for me and at the CBSA, the BCCC, the Border Commercial Consultative Committees, is that CPMA is one of the only commodity-focused groups there. So there's a lot of trade associations, but they might represent importers or exporters more broadly, or different service providers. And we are the ones, us and maybe one or two other groups, who represent commodities. And we're the only food sector group that's there. So we really bring a different perspective to that table in terms of talking about the importance of cold chain infrastructure, the importance of accounting for perishable goods, and the importance of accounting for essential goods, and questions about food security and food waste that arise when there might be delays or that cold chain infrastructure is not in place. So it's a really important place for us to be, because some of those other groups, they do great work and they're wonderful partners, but their focus is not the same as ours, and they can't speak in the same way to the nuances of our sector. So it's a really important place for us to be. And in terms of CBSA, I think it's always good to build relationships, because we have to recognize too, we see regularly in the news, border finding, tons of cocaine and a shipment of whatever. And if that is CBSA's only impression of the industry, then progress is only going to go so far. Whereas if we can really build a relationship, have a discussion about the challenges we're facing and express to them, our members want to be compliant. Our members want to follow the rules, but they need to know that their product is going to be able to move when they do that. So I think being at the table and having those conversations, we have heard openness from CBSA to having those discussions. So that's always a really good thing.
So looking ahead, Shannon, before I let you go, what are some of the upcoming changes or CBSA projects that you're watching? And what should the fresh produce industry be on the lookout for?
So I think the biggest one that I want to make sure that I talk to is CARM, which is CBSA Assessment and Revenue Management, CARM. The CARM portal is a major shift in terms of how importers will interact with CBSA and do their accounting with CBSA in terms of making their payments and looking at their statement of account. It really puts a lot more onus on the importer to have greater oversight and involvement in understanding what the state of their account is with CBSA and making sure that they're doing all those things correctly, even if they are working with a service provider like a broker. So you still are able to work with a broker, but the importer has to go into the portal and delegate authority and make a plan with their broker for how that will all work. And the importer is still ultimately the one on the hook with CBSA for making sure that everything's done correctly. So it is a major change for folks. And it's something that is going to be coming up. The initial release, which has very limited functionality, but it's sort of to get everybody set up, is coming later this year, and then full implementation later on in 2022. So it's something that I attend monthly meetings, lucky duck that I am, about CARM. And so we're very engaged in that. Our customs working group is also really engaged. A number of them participated in the user testing sessions, which has been really valuable feedback to hear. And we're working on putting together some prepare to be onboarded resources for our members, so everyone watch out for those and make sure you see them. But in the interim, if you have not already done so, identify someone on your team who's going to be your CARM project lead, because it is a little bit of an undertaking to get set up in the portal and to have all of your systems set up. If you work with a service provider, make sure you talk to them about what your plan is going to be and what their plan is for CARM, because they are very involved in that as well. And the third thing is that we are going to have a webinar with CBSA in June. So watch out for the dates for that. So CARM.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, certainly one to watch out for. So, well, that's great insight. And thank you so much, Shannon, for joining the show. It's great information.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Big thank you again to Steve and Shannon for joining me on this episode. To learn more about CPMA's work on the international trade of fresh fruits and vegetables, head to cpma.ca/industry. Until next time, fill half your plate with fruits and veggies, continue to seek out new knowledge, and basically never stop growing.